They are hiding something. I just know it. Mrs. Benson, the head teacher of Greenfield High School, whispered to her colleague as she peered through the window. Outside, under the dim evening light, 4 students walked together, their faces serious, their eyes darting around as if making sure no one followed them. They moved swiftly toward the school gate and disappeared into the city streets. For weeks, rumors had been swirling around these 4 students. Aisha, the quiet but smart girl. Lisa, the beautiful but mysterious one. Jaden, the athletic but rebellious boy. And Malcolm, the brainy but reserved one. Teachers and students alike noticed that every day after school, the 4 of them would gather at the back of the schoolyard, talking in hushed voices, checking their watches, and then disappearing into the evening. Some said they were part of a secret gang. Others whispered that they were involved in illegal activities. A few even claimed they had seen them sneaking around the dark alleys of the city at night. They are definitely up to no good, one of the teachers muttered. Even their parents had begun to worry. Aisha's mother, a hard-working single mom, had asked her daughter where she went every evening, but Aisha had only smiled and said, "Just out with friends, Mama. Don't worry." Lisa's wealthy parents, who barely had time for their daughter, had assumed she was just hanging out at the mall. Jaden's strict father was convinced his son was sneaking off to meet some gang. And Malcolm's parents, both teachers, feared their son was being influenced by bad company. But no one truly knew the truth. That evening, as the 4 of them hurried away from school, the head teacher decided she had enough. She called one of the security guards. "Follow them," she ordered. "Find out exactly what they are up to." The guard nodded and quietly slipped through the gate, keeping a safe distance behind the students. A narrow escape. Meanwhile, Aisha, Lisa, Jaden, and Malcolm walked faster, feeling a strange tension in the air. "Are we being followed?" Malcolm whispered, glancing over his shoulder. Lisa turned slightly and saw a shadow moving behind them. "I think we are," she said, her voice low. Jaden clenched his fists. "Damn, I knew this would happen one day. Someone's onto us." "Relax," Aisha said. "We just have to be careful." They quickened their pace, turning a corner into a narrow alley, then slipping through a shortcut between 2 old buildings. They emerged on the other side of the street, scanning for any signs of their follower. The security guard, unable to keep up without being spotted, hesitated for a moment. By the time he reached the alley, the students were gone. Frustrated, he turned back and decided to report to the head teacher. The shocking secret. Far from the school, deep in one of the poorest neighborhoods of the city, the 4 students finally reached their destination. It was an old, run-down building with cracks in the walls, its roof patched with plastic sheets. The entrance smelled of damp clothes and old newspapers. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of home-cooked food. Laughter and voices filled the space as children, women, and a few elderly people sat on the floor, some eating, some talking, some simply resting. As soon as the 4 students entered, a group of little children ran up to them. "Aisha! Lisa!" a little girl shouted excitedly. "You're back!" Lisa bent down and hugged the girl. "Of course we are. We promised, didn't we?" Jaden and Malcolm carried 2 heavy bags and placed them on a table. They opened them to reveal stacks of food, clothes, and medicine. An old woman with gray hair smiled warmly at them. "You kids are angels," she said. "If only the world knew what you were doing." Aisha laughed. "The world doesn't need to know. As long as they have food and a safe place, that's all that matters." Lisa nodded, handing out some bread to the children. "We don't need recognition. We just want to help." For months, these 4 high school students had been using their own pocket money and savings to buy food, clothes, and supplies for the homeless and struggling families in this community. They had seen the suffering, the hunger, the pain on the streets, and they had decided to do something about it without telling anyone. Because they knew what people would think. The world was quick to judge. But if only they knew the truth. Back at school, the security guard reported to the head teacher. "I lost them, but I'm sure they're up to something." Mrs. Benson frowned. "This is serious. I will inform their parents immediately." That night, as Aisha, Lisa, Jaden, and Malcolm returned home, none of them knew what awaited them. Their parents had been alerted. Their school was suspicious. The secret they had protected so carefully was about to be exposed. and they had no idea how the world would react. What is the meaning of this? Aisha barely had time to remove her shoes when she heard her mother's voice, sharp, serious, and full of suspicion. Her heart pounded. She glanced at the living room and saw her mother sitting with her arms crossed, her phone in her hand, her face a mixture of worry and anger. Lisa was facing the same situation at her house. Her parents, who barely paid attention to her, were suddenly giving her full, undivided attention. Jaden's father had his belt in hand, while Malcolm's parents, both teachers, sat with a deep frown on their faces, disappointment written all over them. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Aisha swallowed hard. "Mama, what's going on?" Her mother waved the phone at her. "Your school called. They say you've been sneaking off every evening with those friends of yours. Where do you go, Aisha? What have you been doing?" Aisha's stomach tightened. Lisa's mother, usually cold and indifferent, was staring at her with piercing eyes. "Lisa, you better tell us the truth now. Are you in a gang? Are you taking drugs?" Lisa flinched. "What? No. How could you even think that?" Jaden's father wasn't the type to ask questions. He was the type to assume the worst. "You're lying to me, boy. If I find out you've been doing something illegal, I will deal with you." Malcolm tried to speak, but his mother's stern voice cut through him like a knife. "Malcolm, your father and I taught you better than this. Whatever you are doing in secret, it ends tonight." The four friends were trapped. How could they explain? Would their parents even believe them? No one had ever believed in them before. The price of silence. The next morning, all four of them arrived at school in silence, their faces filled with frustration and fear. "What did you guys tell them?" Jaden asked as they sat in the empty classroom before the first lesson. "Nothing," Lisa muttered. "They wouldn't believe me even if I told them the truth." "Same here," Malcolm sighed. "My mom looked at me like I was a criminal." Aisha pressed her fingers against her forehead. "I just don't understand why people always assume the worst about us." And Lisa clenched her fists. "Because we don't act like everyone else. We don't gossip, we don't show off, and we don't try to be popular. So they assume we're bad kids." Jaden leaned back in his chair. "And if they ever find out what we're really doing, they'll still find a way to twist it into something bad." A heavy silence filled the room. They had been doing good, sacrificing their own money, their own time, their own comfort to help others. Yet the world was ready to punish them for something they hadn't even done. It wasn't fair. It never had been. But trouble was only beginning. The school's verdict. At lunchtime, an announcement was made over the speakers. Isha Khalid, Lisa Thompson, Jaden Miller, and Malcolm Grant report to the principal's office immediately. The entire cafeteria went silent. Everyone turned to stare at them. Whispers spread like wildfire. "I told you they were up to something. Maybe they got caught stealing. Maybe they got arrested and the school just found out." Lisa clenched her jaw and stood up. "Let's go before these people say worse things." The four of them walked through the hallways, their heads high, but their hearts pounding. Inside the principal's office, their parents were already waiting. The head teacher, Mrs. Benson, stood with her arms folded. The principal, a middle-aged man with deep lines on his forehead, cleared his throat. "You four have been under observation for a while now," he began. "Your behavior after school has raised concerns among teachers and students alike, sneaking off every evening, acting secretive, avoiding questions. It all suggests that something illegal is happening." Lisa's mother folded her arms. "Lisa, just admit it. Whatever you're doing, it ends today." Jaden's father gave him a deadly glare. "Tell them the truth now before it gets worse for you, boy." Aisha's mother placed a trembling hand on her chest. "Aisha, please, my child, I don't want you to ruin your future." Malcolm's father looked disappointed. "I raised you better than this, son." The four of them exchanged glances. This was it. They had to make a choice. Tell the truth and risk no one believing them, or continue hiding and let the world think the worst. Aisha took a deep breath. Then she spoke. "We haven't done anything wrong," she said. "You think we're sneaking off to do bad things, but the truth is, we've been using our savings to buy food and clothes for homeless people." Lisa stepped forward. "We've been helping poor families. We go to the shelters, we visit the sick, we donate everything we can afford. That's where we go after school." Jaden's voice was firm. but nobody ever stops to ask us before assuming we're criminals. Malcolm added, you just see 4 students acting different, and you assume we're bad kids. The room went silent. The teachers looked at each other in shock. The parents blinked. Mrs. Benson frowned. Do you really expect us to believe that? Lisa's mother scoffed. A bunch of high school kids spending their own money to help strangers? Do you think we're stupid? Jaden clenched his fists. That's exactly the problem. No one believes us. The principal sighed. If what you're saying is true, then prove it. Show us exactly what you've been doing after school. Aisha took a deep breath. We will. The final test. That evening, under the watchful eyes of their teachers, parents, and a few curious students who had followed them, Aisha, Lisa, Jaden, and Malcolm walked into the poorest neighborhood in the city. The adults looked around in confusion as they saw the small, run-down shelter filled with children, elderly people, and struggling families. The students rushed forward, hugging Aisha and Lisa. An old woman smiled and said, "My angels are back." A homeless father shook Jaden's hand. "Thank you for the food last week, son. You saved my kids from going hungry." Malcolm handed a little girl a bag of clothes. "Here, sweetheart. These should fit you well." The parents and teachers watched stunned as reality hit them. They had been wrong. Horribly wrong. Tears filled Aisha's mother's eyes. Lisa's mother covered her mouth in shock. Jaden's father looked down, ashamed. Malcolm's parents exchanged guilty glances. Mrs. Benson wiped her eyes, and the principal sighed deeply. "I can't believe it," he whispered. "We judged you without ever knowing the truth." The 4 friends stood in front of them, proud and unshaken. "This is who we are," Aisha said firmly. "We're not criminals. We're just kids who wanted to make a difference." And for the first time, the world finally saw them for who they truly were. How could we have been so wrong? The words came from Aisha's mother, her voice barely above a whisper as she looked around the shelter. The air was thick with unspoken guilt. Parents who had been so certain their children were involved in something criminal now stood frozen, watching the very people their kids had been helping. Lisa's mother, who rarely showed emotion, was the first to break. She turned to her daughter, eyes shining with disbelief. "Lisa, why didn't you tell me?" Lisa let out a bitter laugh. "Would you have believed me?" Silence. Because they all knew the truth. No one would have believed them. The principal shifted uncomfortably. "You 4 should have come to us first. You should have told us what you were doing." Jaden scoffed. "Oh yeah? Like that time we told you we weren't causing trouble, and you called us liars?" Malcolm shook his head. "The truth is, nobody ever listens to kids like us. If we had told you, you still would have found a way to make us look bad." Their words cut deep. The teachers and parents had nothing to say, because deep down, they knew it was true. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies could erase the betrayal they had felt. A new beginning or a new threat? The following morning, the 4 of them walked into school, unsure of what to expect. Would things be different? Would people finally stop looking at them with suspicion? They got their answer the moment they stepped into the hallway. Whispers, stares, judging eyes that followed them like shadows. But something was different this time. Instead of gossiping about them being criminals, the rumors had changed. "Did you hear? They've been using their own money to help the homeless." "I thought they were into some gang stuff, but turns out they're actually good people." "I wish I had that kind of heart. Imagine sacrificing your lunch money for strangers." But not everyone was impressed. Kendra James, the school's most popular girl, leaned against a locker, flipping her hair as she smirked. "What a joke," she muttered just loud enough for them to hear. "You guys really think you're heroes now?" Her group of friends laughed. Lisa clenched her fists. "What's your problem, Kendra?" Kendra rolled her eyes. "My problem? You guys are acting like saints when all you did was throw some crumbs at a few poor people. What do you want, a medal?" Jaden took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "We don't want anything. We just did what we thought was right." Kendra stepped forward, her eyes cold. "People like you are pathetic. You waste your money on useless people. And for what? To prove something? To look better than the rest of us?" Aisha's hands tightened into fists. "We don't do this for attention, Kendra. Unlike you, we actually care about people other than ourselves." Kendra's smirk vanished. For a brief moment, something flashed in her eyes. Anger, insecurity, maybe even jealousy. But she covered it up with a fake laugh. Whatever. Enjoy your little charity act while it lasts, because people get bored fast. And when they do, they'll forget you ever existed. With that, she flipped her hair and walked away. But her words left a bitter taste in their mouths. Because deep down, they knew she wasn't completely wrong. Would people forget? Would this whole thing become nothing more than another passing rumor? And if that happened, would the support they were finally getting disappear? An unexpected offer. Later that day, just as they were about to leave school, a voice called out from behind them. Wait! They turned to see Mr. Collins, their history teacher, hurrying toward them. Mr. Collins was one of the few teachers who never treated them like troublemakers. He was quiet, observant, and had always looked at them with something that almost felt like respect. I need to talk to you, he said, slightly out of breath. What you kids are doing? It's incredible. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Is this the part where you tell us we should have come to the school first? To their surprise, Mr. Collins shook his head. No, this is the part where I tell you I want to help. That caught them off guard. Jaden crossed his arms. Help how? Mr. Collins smiled. The school has a charity fund, not a big one, but enough to help students who want to do good things. If you're serious about this, I can pull some strings and get you some extra support. Aisha's eyes widened. You mean the school would actually back us up? Mr. Collins nodded. But it won't be easy. You'll have to make it official. Prove that your work is real. Show them results. Malcolm hesitated. What's the catch? Mr. Collins sighed. The school board will be watching. Some people won't be happy about this. If you fail, they'll use it as proof that you were never serious. And if you mess up, they'll make sure you regret it. Lisa exchanged glances with the others. This was big. Bigger than anything they had imagined. For the first time, they had a real opportunity to make a difference. But at what cost? Jaden exhaled. When do we start? Mr. Collins smiled. Tomorrow morning, you'll present your work to the school board. If they approve, this could change everything. Aisha's heart raced. Tomorrow. Everything they had worked for came down to tomorrow. And deep down, she knew. Not everyone wanted to see them succeed. To be continued in part 4. Will the school truly support them? Or will someone try to destroy everything they've built? This isn't going to be easy. Aisha stared at the stack of papers in front of them. Documents, reports, and proof of every single thing they had done at the shelter. The school board wanted evidence, and they were going to get it. But the real question was, would it even matter? The next morning, the 4 of them sat outside the principal's office, waiting for their turn to present. The school board had gathered in the conference room. Important people. People with power. People who had already decided long ago that kids like them were nothing but trouble. Lisa drummed her fingers against her knee. You think they'll actually listen? Jaden exhaled. I think they'll pretend to listen and then shut us down anyway. Malcolm scoffed. Then let's make it hard for them. Let's make sure they have no excuse to ignore us. The door opened. Mr. Collins stepped out, looking at them with a firm nod. It's time. They followed him into the conference room. Inside a long table stretched across the room, where 8 members of the school board sat, dressed in expensive suits and sharp expressions. The principal was at the head of the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. Aisha swallowed hard. This was it. Good morning, Mr. Collins started. Today, we have 4 students who have taken it upon themselves to make a real difference in their community. They have been using their own money and time to support the homeless. They have not asked for recognition. They have not sought attention. They did this because they believed it was the right thing to do. And today, they are here to prove that their work deserves the school's support. Silence. Then, the board chairwoman, Mrs. Hampton, adjusted her glasses. Let's get one thing straight. This school does not fund personal projects. We support established programs, not random acts of kindness. Lisa stiffened. Random? Mrs. Hampton didn't even blink. That's what it is, isn't it? A nice little hobby, but that's not enough to warrant school funding. Jaden stepped forward. We're not asking for handouts. We're asking for a chance. If the school supports us, we can help more people. We can make a real impact. A man at the far end of the table leaned forward. Mr. Davidson. He was known for being strict. Tell me, How do we even know you've been doing what you claim? You have no official records, no proper organization, nothing but your word. Malcolm pulled out a thick folder. Actually, we do. He placed it on the table. The room went still. One of the board members opened it and started flipping through pages. Receipts, photos, statements from the shelter staff, even letters from homeless individuals who had been helped. Mrs. Hampton's lips pressed into a thin line. You've been keeping records? Aisha nodded. We knew no one would believe us unless we had proof. For the first time, the board members looked uncertain. One of them, an older man with a thoughtful expression, leaned back. This is impressive, but tell me, what happens when the money runs out? You can't keep funding this with your own savings forever. Lisa straightened. That's why we're here. If the school helps us, we can turn this into something sustainable. We can hold fundraising events, get sponsors, and expand the project. Jaden nodded. We don't just want to do this for a few weeks. We want this to last. A heavy silence followed. Then Mrs. Hampton sighed. We'll discuss this and make a decision. The principal cleared his throat. You may leave now. The waiting game. They stepped out of the room, nerves stretched thin. Lisa paced the hallway. They're totally going to say no. Jaden leaned against the wall. Maybe, but we gave them no reason to. Malcolm rubbed his temples. Still, something doesn't feel right. Aisha felt it too. Something about the way the principal had looked at them. Something about the way Mrs. Hampton had sighed, like she had already made up her mind. Mr. Collins joined them after a while. They'll give you an answer by tomorrow morning. Jaden groaned. Why does it take so long to decide if they're going to say no? Mr. Collins smiled slightly. Because they weren't expecting this. You caught them off guard. That's a good thing. Aisha wasn't so sure. The betrayal. That night, none of them could sleep. And the next morning, as soon as they arrived at school, a crowd was already waiting for them. People were whispering, staring. Lisa frowned. What's going on? Jaden pulled out his phone. His face went pale. Guys, you need to see this. He turned the screen toward them. A news article. The headline hit them like a punch. High school students caught faking charity work for personal gain. Aisha's breath caught. No, this can't be real. Malcolm grabbed the phone and scrolled down. His hands shook as he read. Sources claim that the 4 students have been using donations for personal use, with no proof of actual charity work being done. Lisa's heart pounded. What? We just showed them the proof. Then a sharp voice made them freeze. Knew you were all frauds, Kendra. She stood with her arms crossed, a smirk on her face. Thought you could fool everyone? Guess not. Jaden clenched his fists. You did this, didn't you? Kendra laughed. Me? Please. I don't have to do anything. The truth always comes out. Aisha turned to Mr. Collins, who had just arrived, his face dark with anger. Who did this? Who spread this lie? Mr. Collins gritted his teeth. I have a strong suspicion, but we have to be careful. This was planned. Someone doesn't want you to succeed. Lisa's voice shook. But the school board saw our proof. They know it's not true. Mr. Collins sighed. And yet, somehow, the entire school believes it. It didn't make sense. They had done everything right. So why did it feel like the entire world had turned against them? Aisha's eyes burned with frustration. And then it hit her. Someone on that board wanted us to fail. But who? And more importantly, how were they going to fight back? To be continued in part 5. Everything is falling apart. Who is behind this betrayal? And can they clear their names before it's too late? If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will believe it. That's exactly what was happening. Aisha, Lisa, Jaden, and Malcolm had spent months pouring their hearts into helping the homeless. They had sacrificed their savings, their time, their energy. And now, with one twisted news article, the entire school believed they were frauds. It didn't matter that they had evidence. It didn't matter that they had proof. Because in the eyes of the public, gossip spreads faster than the truth. They sat in the empty classroom, heads down, exhausted. What do we do now? Lisa muttered. Jaden clenched his fists. We fight back. Malcolm scoffed. How? The whole school thinks we're criminals. Aisha took a deep breath. Then we show them the truth, where they can't ignore it. Lisa frowned. What do you mean? Aisha's eyes burned with determination. We go public. We take our own story to the media. The room went silent. Jaden leaned forward. You mean Fight back with the truth? Aisha nodded. They used the news against us. Let's use it against them. Malcolm smirked. Now that's an idea I like. Taking back control. They didn't waste time. That night, Aisha sat in front of a camera and hit record. This is the truth they don't want you to hear. One by one, they told their story. They showed the receipts, the photos, the testimonials. They shared everything, the real work they had done, and how someone had twisted the truth to ruin them. Then, they uploaded it. Within hours, the video was spreading like wildfire. The real enemy exposed. The next day when they walked into school, things were different. People were whispering, but not in the way they had before. This time, they were watching the video. Even teachers. Then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Collins stormed down the hallway, his face red with anger. He was holding his phone up, playing the video. Behind him, 2 school board members followed, looking furious. You 4, come with me. Now. They walked into the principal's office. But this time, they weren't the ones on trial. The principal, Mr. Harris, sat at his desk looking pale. Mrs. Hampton was already inside. Her face was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. The moment they stepped in, one of the board members threw a file onto the desk. Care to explain this, Principal Harris? Aisha, Lisa, Jaden, and Malcolm exchanged glances. Explain what? Jaden asked cautiously. The board member pointed at the file. We received an anonymous tip about someone paying a journalist to publish a false story about these students. Lisa's heart pounded. Aisha's eyes widened. Malcolm took a step forward. And who exactly was behind it? The room fell silent. Then Mrs. Hampton sighed. It was Principal Harris. Everything stopped. Jaden's fists tightened. What? Mr. Collins crossed his arms. We already suspected someone on the board was involved, but it turns out it wasn't one of us. It was him. The principal's face was full of anger and shame. I was protecting the school's reputation. These students were acting recklessly, making us look bad. Mr. Collins cut him off. No, you were protecting your own ego. You didn't want them to succeed because they made the school look lazy in comparison. Mrs. Hampton stood up. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your position. An investigation will determine your permanent removal. Aisha felt her breath hitch. They had won. They had actually won. The aftermath. The school issued a public apology. The news article was retracted. And most importantly, their project was finally recognized. The school board approved funding. The students were allowed to turn their charity work into an official school program. Lisa grinned. We did it. Jaden nodded. We really did. Malcolm smirked. And we're just getting started. Aisha looked out the window, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the struggle, the fight. But in the end, the truth had won, and that's what mattered most. The final message. Sometimes people will doubt you. They will spread lies. They will try to tear you down. But the truth is powerful. If you stand by it, no one can destroy you. This isn't just a story. It's a lesson. Do what's right, even when no one believes in you. Because one day, the truth will speak louder than any lie.